All right, thanks, Wendy. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Wendy said, I'm Tony Bergantino. I'm the director of the Wyoming State Climate Office, the Water Resources Data System. And thanks for joining us for this first briefing after the spring equinox. And even though spring has really only been here for about 10 hours now, but it's here. The briefing today is going to be put on by my office, along with the University of Wyoming Extension, the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, US Geological Survey, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, National Weather Service office up in Riverton. And for our special highlight, we have a guest from the National Weather Service office in Portland. And a lot to cover today. We have climate, drought conditions, stream flows, reservoir operations, forecasts, outlook. Then for the highlight of the month, we'll hear about CANL, or the Cold Advisory for Newborn Livestock System. So let's jump into our current conditions here. And we have the U.S. Drought Monitor map that was released this morning. It goes through Tuesday, the 18th. And like last month, we've got a lot of green areas highlighted here, indicating areas of improvement since the last webinar. And this is one of those rare times when every change there's been since we last met has been an improvement. Unfortunately, no green down here in the southeast, although many areas of the rest of the state did see 1 to 2 categories of improvement. Those March snows have helped out, and while we've had some warmer temperatures, the snow that has melted in the lower elevation areas has led to an increase in the soil moisture. Though we've had the improvements recently, and even though last year conditions were in the process of deteriorating, the comparison of the drought monitor a year ago here on the left to today here on the right shows only a few areas now that are better than last year. And those areas are the 3 that are highlighted up here in the green on this right side of the map. So here's the longer time period, the timeline looking back 25 years of the U.S. Drought Monitor. We're currently at 73.28% of the state, and one of the moderate, severe, extreme, or exceptional categories, or more commonly referred to as D1 through D4. That percentage is down 8.25% from the last webinar. If you include that D0 or abnormally dry condition, the yellow that we're seeing on the map, then you're at 92.29% of the state being affected. And that's down too, almost 16% from the last webinar. So honing in on the last 5 years and showing the last and current drought cycles, you can see a better breakdown of the ebb and flow of conditions. Right side of the chart shows a decrease in all the D categories. At the top, we can see the percentage of state completely free of any D category is now at 7.71%, which is up a little over 6% from the last time we met. Down at the bottom right, that's the percentage of state still in D3 or extreme drought, and that's now at 15.57%. And that too is down, not as much, 2.15% from last month. All right, we've seen some pretty good precipitation in many parts of the state over the last 2 weeks, especially in these central areas, Bighorn Basin, Southwest, but also extending up into the northeastern part of Wyoming. Much of the green, along with the Wind and Bighorn Basins, have had over 300% of normal precipitation over the last 14 days. And this actually extended across the Bighorns into the Tongue River drainage. Missing out on all this has been the far southeast, along with some small areas in the northeast and down here in the southwest. Looking back 3 months, the western half of Wyoming has fared fairly well, with the Bighorn and Wind Basins receiving 150 to over 200% of normal, or about being in the 90th percentile. Again, the east, especially the far east, along with some scattered other pockets, has not done as well, and showing median to well below median precipitation over the last 3 months. All right, a quick comparison of the water year here on the left and the calendar year on the right in terms of precipitation as a percent of normal. You can still see the remnants of that sort of diagonal swath of above normal precipitation on the left, but the shape is kind of morphing, if you will, to fit more of the precipitation that we've seen there in the Bighorn, Wind, and Green River basins. The dryness in the southeast that has been with us the last several months is evident as well. On the right, precip since the start of the calendar year, we've actually been above average for quite a bit of the state, thanks to some of the more recent events. Eastern areas and a few parts of the west still showing below average, however. So here we have the standardized precipitation index showing conditions at 1 and 2 months across the top left and right, and then a full year down here on the lower right. So at the 30 and 60-day time frames, the wetness in the west and south and a bit of the Bighorns, but east of the Bighorns there stands out and is mostly stronger in the 30-day compared to over on the 60-day, and that's indicating a continuing wettening of conditions there. The Northwest, though, is it's showing a little bit drier in the 1 month compared to the 2 month depiction, although even in the 30-day, it's right about the normal. The dryness that's evident in the east on the 60-day there on the right is much less prominent when you get over onto the 30-day as well, again, indicating some improving conditions. Looking down on the lower right corner here at the 1 year representation, not a lot of blue or wet showing up. East Central area is still standing out as significantly dry, but comparing this time frame to the 30 and 60-day here across the top just kind of accentuates the improvements that we've seen recently compared to the longer term conditions. All right, on the upper right here are average low temperatures across the state for the last 2 weeks. Still getting below freezing statewide. Only by a little bit there in the eastern Bighorn Basin. The very high elevations have still been getting into the single digits, but just barely usually. On the lower left, we have temperatures, and this is being shown as a departure from normal. So with the exception of the lower wind and parts of northeast Sweetwater County, temperatures have been normal to above normal, with the greatest departures up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit in places being up in the Northwest. The southwest and south central regions have been about normal, while the remainder of the state's been up to about 4 degrees above normal. Looking over at daytime highs, here on the upper right, we're mostly above freezing, except for the very high elevations again, which have been into the mid to upper 20s. Warmest temperatures have been on the eastern plains, with the Bighorn Basin and the northeast a close second. In the southeast, maximum temperatures have averaged mid-50s really over the last 14 days. Then going down here to the lower left again, the departures from normal, and the southwestern, I guess, 3/4 of the state, along with the Northwest, about 4 to 5 degrees below normal. The far east and northeastern border part of the state was in the area of 1 to 3 degrees above normal, with the northeast corner up there in Cook County seeing departures up to 7 degrees above normal. And that area is showing the greatest positive departures from normal. Soil moisture, well, compared to 2 weeks ago, in short, soil moisture has deteriorated in the east, basically to the right of this green line, and has improved to the west of it. Moving to snowpack, map here on the left showing current snow water equivalent, or SWE, while the smaller one here on the right shows conditions 1 year ago. Currently, the western half of the state, along with the Laramie and Upper North Platte, round to about a little bit above median. Comparing with last year, though, we've got kind of a mixed bag of above and below. 13 of the basins are doing better this year than last. Across the southern part of the state, we saw a better snowpack last year on the state for those 6 basins. The red line kind of indicates sort of a demarcation between the basins that are doing better last year, those up above the line, and those that are not doing as well down here south of the line. And the Snake River Basin here has actually reached its median seasonal peak and is continuing to decrease above that. All right, looking at modeled snowpack across the state. Again, these are gridded data versus the last map that has a single number for each of the basins, and that's based on the relative snowtail sites in that basin. Northern Bighorn Basin, Snake River Basin, some of the low-lying areas are sitting at to well above median, actually. The area corresponding to the southern part of the Bear River Basin, though, is showing quite below median, although the basin-wide snowpack number that we saw earlier was, I believe it was 109% of median. We had a really good question about this last month, different area, but the answer bears some repeating. And in this case, this is lower elevation, but the same issue stands, that this is an area where there are no snowtail sites, those brighter dots on the map. So up here where you're seeing the better values, you actually have some snowtail sites in the area, and that's what's contributing to the number that you saw versus this more aerial representation. All right, compared to last year, some good purples and blues and greens on the map, and those indicates areas that are above where they were last year. And unfortunately, as was just mentioned on the last slide, the southwest part of the state, as well as the Sierra Madres and some distinct areas in the northwest, show that deep dark brown color. And those are areas that are down as much as the bright purple areas are above where they were last year. So kind of a mixed bag there, depending on where you're at in the state. All right, this table is getting a lot more meaning now that we're building up that pack. Still kind of interesting to track even in the earlier months, but now is when it really starts to carry some weight. And just a little brief explanation again on the table, even though I went over it last month. It shows the current water year and the status of the basins as the snowpack is increasing. And this is updated daily. And the table gives the date of the peak snow water equivalent so far, here in the first column here to the right of the basin name. And all but the Belle Fourche and Cheyenne are currently at their peak snow pack for this year so far. 11 March was for those two basins. The third column shows what the current peak is, and next to that is how many days early or late it would be if it was to be the peak for the year. The fifth column shows how high or low the current peak is from the median, and then what percent of the median that would be. The last three columns are stats that show peak dates, the median peak dates, snow water equivalent for each basin. The final shows about when the meltout usually occurs. And like last month, there are three basins highlighted, two in red, one in green. The ones in red, the lower North Platte and the Powder River Basin, they've had peaks so far that are currently about 2/3 of their median seasonal peak. And these aren't the lowest ones in the state, but they are the lowest of the more significant ones. You got the South Platte and Wyoming, and then the Belle Fourche and Cheyenne, which typically don't get as much snow water equivalent. So the percents there can really change on a dime, really. The one highlighting green is the Snake River Basin, which has now reached its median peak snowpack already. In fact, it exceeded it today. It reached that peak value 24 days early. So go ahead and take a look using the URL on the lower left and just continue to track this through the season. So if you click on that basin name that was on that last table, you get a graph that looks like this one here. This is for the Snake, which has, as I said, already reached and exceeded its median seasonal peak, and that's that green dot there. Just as a reminder from last month, the blue line is the maximum snow water equivalent for each day. The red is the all-time minimum. And then that green line shows the 1991 to 2020 median snowpack. The black one is this year's trace. That gray line there shows last year's accumulation. And while we started out low last year in the state, we did catch up around the first part of March. And here's some examples also showing the Snake Basin of the graphs for that peak date and peak amount by year. The orange line on both of these is a 10-year centered moving average of the amount and the date. And on the left, the green line represents the median, and on the right, the blue line that's right at 11 April is the median there. The blue dots that you see on both of those are the values and the dates for each individual year. So with that in mind, the graph here on the left is showing median seasonal peak SWE for each year from 1981 to present. And on the far right where that arrow is, you can see the peak for this year and how it is, just above that green median line, which is corresponding to the 101% of peak, median peak that we saw in the previous table. On the right here, these are the dates that each year's seasonal peak hit. And then the green dot down here on the lower right is where we're at today. And just one more here, going to our poor performing basin, the Powder here on this slide. The color scheme is the same, but there's some additional dotted lines showing up here, which might be a little bit difficult to see. There's a blue, a green, and a red dotted line that extends from the end of the black line. And these lines indicate where snowpack will go if we get maximum values for the rest of the year. That's the blue dotted line. Or if we get the minimum values, then we got this red dotted line. And then if we just have normal from this time out, we get that green dotted line. And unfortunately for water supply, this is looking to be the second year in a row for the Powder River Basin where we've stayed below the median for the season. So on that note, let's go over to Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS to give us an update on surface water conditions. Aaron?
Thanks, Tony. So here's a look at the National Water Information Dashboard map for Wyoming taken from yesterday. And we're starting to see a lot more different colors on the maps now as sites start to come out of ice. Just a reminder, when we have ice in the river, it disrupts the stage discharge relationship and it makes the USGS unable to provide accurate real-time discharge information, so that those sites will typically be worked up by a technician here at a later date working the winter record. But if you look around the state, you see a mix of colors. Mostly normal is the green, what is considered the 25th to the 75th percentile, with the kind of central flow or your normal to be a median. So you see a fair amount of those greens. If you kind of surfed around and interacted with those various gauges, you would find somewhere below the median and somewhere above. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Then you'll see some sites that are the above normal, the 76th to 90th percentile in various locations, and then a few that are much below normal or in the reds and the oranges. So the 25th percentile for the oranges and below, and the 10th percentile and below. So the caveat here is that we're still in March. Things are usually generally kind of locked up, with the majority of our water supply being up in the mountains. But when you have some snow melt off or things like that, it can raise flows and kind of show it to be much above, or things can kind of be kind of dry and show it to be much below. So it's kind of hard to look at a map like this and kind of make an assessment of, well, if we're in an area of drought, is the rivers really responding to that drought, or is there kind of something else going on? And we'll probably see a little bit of that as we bounce around the state, but generally not a time of big water supply, and we're about a month to a month and a half from kind of really getting into runoff and things kind of moving. But that could be different if your headwaters of the river are more in the prairie. So moving on to the next slide, we'll just kind of bounce around here looking at the Wind River above Red Creek and Du Bois. Starting the water year, things been pretty low there through January, hanging around that 25th percentile, but kind of coming into February and March, things have kind of trended towards that, getting closer to the 75th percentile. So things have kind of changed there and stayed consistent there since the early part of February. So hopefully that kind of trend continues, but we still looking here is about a month away from kind of water supply starting to increase in that location. So a little ways out before we expect runoff to typically occur there or start to occur. Moving over to Clear Creek. near Buffalo in the Powder, a much different looking hydrograph here. But we can see here that kind of starting off with the beginning of the water year, things were pretty low, took a pretty good dip into November when things were kind of starting to ice up. And then since beginning of December, things have kind of changed where that flow was much closer to the 75th percentile above the median. And it's kind of trended above that into the above normal right now. So probably part of that is due to snow melting off and some localized precipitation. Moving down to Deer Creek near Glen Rock, looking at the black line starting from October into January, things were pretty close to the 25th percentile. Then to the beginning of February, where there's a pretty good jump in stage. There's a little bit of missing record there from ice, but things kind of took a jump up and then went back down, and now back and forth there, a little bit of a roller coaster. But looking at that site, things are starting to kind of trend up and be a little bit closer to that runoff period. So things seem to come off a little bit earlier down in that location. And then moving over to the Snake River, pretty similar trend as the other sites. The beginning of the water year, pretty dry. Things were close to the 25th percentile, and then around the beginning of February, things started to kind of tick up a bit, and the flows were closer to the 75th, and they've kind of maintained in that area. And looking there, we're still about a month away from flows normally starting to be into runoff. But there's always that variability there as when things might start and if it's going to be early or late. So moving on to reservoirs, with not a lot of water supply moving around, what you'd expect is there's mostly very minor changes in storage around the state. Most major reservoirs are somewhere between 50 to 80% full, and that exception would be Fontenelle Reservoir, which is around 34%. In the water, they continue to move water out of that as they've been doing for the past several months to downstream locations. So that's all I have. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Aaron. So next up, we actually have George Finnegan now with the Bureau of Reclamation to go over reservoir status and ops. George.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I'm covering for Liz and myself for the Wyoming area office. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Yeah, we're releasing 260 CFS out of Buffalo Bill, 40 CFS out of Bull Lake, and 700 CFS out of Boyson. And yeah, next slide. Buffalo Bill is 59% full. Bull Lake is 24% full, and Boyson is 70% full. And just to share our operation plans for the summer, releases are expected to increase mid-April and will be based on irrigation demand. No flood releases are anticipated at this time. We're catching up from the dry year we had last year. We also have some dry soils to deal with and a dry summer forecast. That could change if the forecast does, but as of right now, we're expecting to fill, but it's not guaranteed. And so we're operating cautiously. Next slide. And for the North Platte, we've got 530 cubic feet per second coming out of Seminole Cordis, and we've got 500 coming out of Gray Reef. We are actually doing the flushing flow this week into middle of next week, and that is a variable release that we do to clean the sediment where the fish like to spawn and improve the habitat. After flushing, we're going to go back to 500 CFS. We do have the low flow open again at Glendo Reservoir for 25 CFS. I'll share that in October and November of this year, we do plan to try to get back out there to get the crossing installed. And so we will go back to 0 CFS for that activity. Hopefully we can get that done. And finally, there's a little bit of leakage out of Guernsey. Next slide. Yeah, Seminole has 492,000 acre feet, 48% full. Pathfinder has 614,000 acre feet, which is 57% full. And Glendale has 307,000 acre feet, 62% full. And so we are at a little below average content in the North Platte system. That's primarily thanks to the heavy rain we received in 2023, and we're still enjoying that benefit with the storage that we have. We don't have any allocation planned at this time, and similar to our Bighorn Basin, we're planning to meet demand. Very little else, but we do have good storage to meet our demand. So yeah, we're going to increase releases. Alcova will be filling in April. That starts April 1st, and a news release should go out shortly. We're going to be increasing releases from Seminole Cordis in April, and we're going to be filling Guernsey and filling inland lakes around mid-April. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, George. And now we'll go to Lance Vandenbogert for some forecasts and outlooks from the National Weather Service office up in Riverton. Lance?
All right. Thanks, Tony. So looking at our typical hazard calendar here for weather type things, you can see that we're still firmly within winter storm season, given it is still winter, even though it's kind of spring here in Wyoming. Fire weather wise, we do have a couple of zones in central Wyoming that are active, and given the low elevation basin snowpack has melted off in a lot of areas, there's a lot of dead grass out there without green up. So that's that little window you see there. Ice jams haven't been too major of an issue, thankfully, and a lot of streams are starting to open up, at least in the lower elevations. But we are firmly within that high wind period as well. You can see on the bottom of this graphic with multiple weather systems moving through this past week and even into next week, where we're going to have some wind, especially Saturday. So if you got outdoor plans on Saturday, it's going to be windy with some mountain snow. All right, but let's go ahead and jump forward here, and we'll look at the next 7 days. What do we have as far as precipitation? Snow showers will continue for western valleys and mountains throughout the day today. And then there's a widespread snowy system that comes in Friday night through Saturday. So that's going to be what brings the bulk of the moisture shown in this graphic. With that system, areas east of the divide and in the basins across the central, eastern, southern part of the state, you can see very light precip amounts. There's not a ton of precipitation expected, but it could be a trace to, just a little, maybe an inch or two of moisture in the form of snow, which would just be, maybe up to a tenth there in actual melted liquid equivalent. And then it's going to be dry Sunday through most of next week. So if you like warm temperatures, midweek next week is looking pretty good for that. If we step forward here, we'll kind of briefly discuss that. So this would be like from mid-late next week until the week after, the 8 to 14 day outlook. And pretty likely, we're leaning towards likely above normal temperatures for much of Wyoming, especially in the south, with a big ridge of high pressure setting up over the area. And precipitation-wise, there's maybe a slight lean towards wetter as we do get some southwesterly flow during that 1 week period, the week after next, but not a strong lean. So just a slight indication there. And if we jump forward to the month of April, we got equal chances of above or below, which is a way of saying climatology is your best forecast, so a 30-year average. And then if you look over at precipitation on the right, it's a pretty similar story. Maybe there's the southern half to a third of the state very slight lean towards drier than normal with those tan colors showing up. And then if we go ahead and look at kind of the seasonal outlook for spring into early summer, you can see that equal chances still kind of dominates the majority of Wyoming as far as temperatures go, with a slight lean towards the warmer in the southwest or far south. And then a better signal for drier conditions. It's still just a lean. It's not getting those darker brown colors, but all of the state has a better chance of being below normal than above normal for that time frame. And I think that is it as far as my slides go. So I'll pass it back to you, Tony.
All right, thanks, Lance. Now for our highlight of the month, we have Tanya and Francine to talk about CANL, or the cold advisory for newborn livestock. Tanya is the meteorologist in charge for the Portland, Oregon National Weather Service office. While she was at the National Weather Service office in Glasgow, Montana, she developed the CANL program under a COMET partnership project research grant, along with Dr. Larry Kalkstein, who was a biometeorologist with the University of Miami and now retired. Dr. Katrina Frank, who was also a bioclimatologist, unaffiliated at this time. And Dr. Bill Martin, who is retired National Weather Service. So go ahead, Tanya.
I didn't even know bioclimatologist was a job until we started this project. I knew a little bit about biometeorology, but bioclimatology was a whole new one for me. And she went to school at the University of Nebraska, so she did a lot of work with the with the ag research station that was there near Lincoln. So hello, everybody. I just want to say hi to those in Wyoming. I've spent a lot of time in Wyoming. I lived there. I started my career at the Weather Service in Cheyenne, and lots of traveling back and forth from Montana to Colorado. So I know Eastern Wyoming very well. I forecast in Rapid City, so we did the northeast corner of the state. So it's nice to be asked back in virtually. Go ahead, Tony. So this project started after talking with one of our weather spotters. His name was Lynn Cornwell, and he was the former National Cattlemen's Beef Association president for many, many, many years. I remember watching C-SPAN one weekend and not feeling good, laying over the couch. And the president, I don't even remember who the president was at the time, but in the background, there was Lynn sitting right behind him. And I thought, wow, this guy's got some sway and influence. And we started talking about the weather impacts on livestock, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with it at that time until I was able to do a fellowship in a program called WAS-IS, which is the Weather and Society Integrated Studies. And we started looking at projects that we could work on. And one of the people I was with was working on heat health with the EPA. And I started thinking about, well, I don't know that heat's such a big deal in Montana at that time, but cold seems to be, what we deal with. And so we started looking at what could we do, and that's when we got in touch with Larry Kalkstein, and he brought in Katrina. She was one of his grad students, and we started looking at what is the feasibility of doing some sort of an indice for cold weather. And we were looking initially at humans, and there just wasn't enough mortality and morbidity data for us to do anything, even across the entire. We went from Minneapolis to Denver, all the way to the Rocky Mountain front and up, and there just wasn't enough population to have a huge enough signature to make this useful. But what we did keep hearing was livestock, and especially newborn livestock. So we ended up finding this COMET grant through down at NCAR, down in Boulder, and they were able to give us just a small pot of money. It was like $7,500 that we started with, just to look at what's the feasibility of doing something. So go ahead, the next slide. And we started looking at what are these economic impacts, and they're quite a bit. In 2010, livestock losses due directly and then indirectly with other health issues, especially lungs and breathing, due to weather was over $1 billion a year. And being in an agency that's supposed to enhance the economy, we thought, well, this is something that we could certainly pick at and work with. We found that nearly 100,000 newborn calves were dead every year directly due to weather, and that's a $40 to $60 million loss for producers. And then as we started, kind of picking this up and working with it, some of the National Ag Statistics Service data that we had, Montana specifically had $6.3 million in calf losses that year due to weather. And so we're like, okay, we have something here that we can work with. Go ahead to that next slide. And then obviously headlines. So we started looking at headlines and looking at events and what kind of weather was causing these problems. And Dr. Frank had the published research on weather impacts on various types of livestock, but we wanted to go and look at actually historical events, and there was plenty of them to choose from. This one here, just you can read that yourself. I won't go on it, but while we were developing this and even shortly after, I think we can all remember that South Dakota blizzard that happened in October. That just it was amazing how many livestock were lost, and they weren't necessarily newborns, but it just shows what an economic impact weather can have in this arena. So I literally have a folder that's this thick full of articles that we started looking through and looking at dates and events. And go ahead to the next slide. As we were kind of developing this, we started just in Northeast Montana, and we found, yes, there's a need for it. We went and looked at the previous 5 years worth of data to see what could we actually correlate things together. And we were able to do so. And we created kind of a decision tree. And I know nobody can read this, and the intention isn't for you to read those decision trees. It's just to show that that was the second or third rendition of a decision tree that we put together. Then the next year, we got another grant about the same price that allowed us to do some testing and actually hold a users workshop. Katrina flew from Alabama, where she was at, up to Montana, and got to sit and visit with our ranchers as well. And okay, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. Unfortunately, that winter for the Glasgow area, we didn't have hardly any snow at all. I mean, it was a drought. There was nothing really to work with. But Billings got hammered. Boy, they had, that Powder River area down there. They were just huge losses. They had flooding that was happening when rain hit on top of snow and everything melted out. So at that point, we're like, well, we need to go bigger. We need to expand. And so we started expanding. And I think we did this over 3 or 4 years, where we would, wait a winter, test it, see how it ran, and then meet with the users again and get feedback. And then we would incorporate that feedback back into what we were doing and go back and look at more and more climate data. Go ahead, Tony. So one of the big things was, focusing in on the livestock, and the producers kept saying newborns, newborns, newborns. And my question was, well, what is a newborn? To me, seeing all the little calves running around in April, those are newborns. But at this point, they're kind of acclimated. And so what we kept hearing from the ranchers is, now our biggest concern is that first 24 hours where they're trying to regulate their body temperature. And if they come out and they don't get dried off immediately, and it's raining, it's snowing, the winds are howling, that's where they tend to have the biggest losses. And within 24 hours, most producers are bringing in those calves into dry shelter if they can, and providing extra feed, extra water, and things. So we decided to use the definition of less than 24 hours old. Go ahead, Tony. So we started, the obvious ones were, is it precipitating, and what is the temperature? And then as we kind of went through and did that back and forth with, here, we're going to test a little, we're going to get feedback, we're going to test some more, get some feedback. The comments came up with humidity, and I think we kind of laugh about humidity. I'm out in Portland now, and I know what real precip is like, not our 10 to 12 inches on the plains kind of stuff. But humidity can make it harder for those animals to dry off. And then the other one was sky cover. And we all love a nice, warm, sunny 35-degree day in the winter, right? That sun hitting you and getting to absorb in your skin feels great. But That also has an impact on whether those animals can get dry and warm up enough, or if it's cloudy all day and they don't get that opportunity. So sky cover and humidity were two elements that were added at the very end. Go ahead. So after all those decision trees, we couldn't really do the pretty decision tree anymore. We just kind of had to, here's the criteria. We don't have advisory if the wind chill, which includes the temperature. It could be a wind chill with no real wind. Anything above 41 degrees. Slight is 41 degrees for 2 or more hours. If it's just under that, mild, less than 32 degrees for 2 or more hours. So you can see that it gets gradually worse and worse. And then you can change the categories based off of the sunshine and the humidity conditions. And then we also talk about an actual, like a really wet snow versus just that dry, flaky stuff that comes down and doesn't really cause much accumulation. That one is easier to recover from than if you get 6 inches of heavy wet snow that comes down. So we tried to account for like a wetting precipitation event and use that threshold in there as well. Go ahead. So I grabbed these. This is just this week off of the Glasgow website. They had a little bit of an event there, and you can see there's some red that's showing up that's extreme. There's high and extreme in there is the orange and the red. And if you actually click on, so this is every 6 hours and it's updated every 12 hours. So you get a 6-hourly forecast out to 36 hours. And the Weather Service offices, when they publish their grids, their forecasts twice a day, this will update on the websites when it's running properly. If you click on the individual graphics in the upper, or on the left side, so I use the one in the upper left, then you get kind of additional information on the right side. And some of the ranchers were really curious which element was creating it to be extreme or high for them. So if you look, the bottom left is sky cover. It's a little bit of an impact there. But what really the big impact was that there was precipitation coming in and it was measurable enough to trigger the higher events. And then the temperatures were cold enough to put them in that moderate, high, and extreme is the yellow, orange, and red. So go ahead. So when we first started this, we figured livestock producers would be the primary user, especially we had a lot of lambing, calving, and some hogs in Montana. But the biggest surprise was the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks was using it when they started seeing massive wildlife losses after big extreme events that we had. The winter of 2011, I don't think any of us that lived in Montana will forget that year. With the Missouri River flooding that resulted from all of that. But yeah, there was a lot of wildlife losses too that could be correlated if you looked at this. I don't know how you mitigate those losses, but it's just an awareness. And then the one I think that was most surprising was that we were getting a lot of requests from the USDA Farm Service agencies to use it for post-event verification. And we didn't really have an archive of the graphics. So Glasgow, we ended up finally getting an IT person. We didn't have one for 3 years, but we were able to create an archive that we could then share with the USDA at the end of the season. And they were going back and looking at the claims that they had for various losses and able to correlate it. And it was interesting that they were doing that, that became part of their criteria. So this all kind of came about and was no longer experimental in about 2010. And then a lot of people left the Weather Service. Things changed. We had a lot of issues originally because the Weather Service used to do a rancher's advisory or ranching advisory livestock thing back in the 70s and 80s, and then the public-private sector partnerships came into play, and so some of that stuff had to end. our weather service was asking for feedback. They had a website people could go in and state what they were using it for. And there was one particular person who was very adamant that this was a private sector function. The weather service should have no role, whatever, with it. And I said, okay, well, then let the private sector take the formula and do something with it. And here we are 15 years later, and that still has not happened. To me, I think we're trying to enhance the economy as part of our mission, protection of life and property, and livestock is property. So I don't know, they allowed some offices to join when we were reaching out and expanding. And then at one point, Weather Service said, nope, whoever's in is in and whoever's not is out. And I could not get the right people to hear me and change their minds. What I do think is you take that formula that was on that other slide, basically, the scripts are there. Somebody could easily create an app. I am a people person. I am not a programmer. I couldn't program my way out of a brown box if I needed to. So I wish somebody could do it. I know that Ag Research Station in Nebraska, we had reached out to them because they were doing things with livestock with heat and in an app form. And I'm like, we'll give this to you. Just take it and use it. But they also had struggles with staffing around that time, didn't have the IT support they needed and things. So this is kind of languished. I think this could easily be done nationwide. The Weather Service actually had it nationally on our national forecast database. You could grab it off the drop-down menu and boom, there it was. And when they got the one complaint from the private sector person who really truly wasn't actually working for a private sector company, they were kind of retired from it. I don't know what stopped headquarters in their tracks, but it did. I've actually, when I was with the American Meteorological Society on the council, I had a lot of private sector people that were on the council with me, and I tried to say, hey, it's right here. It's just something else you could do and give, and nobody really seemed to have that interest. So I don't know. I think this could easily be done. I do have a pop quiz here, and let's let somebody throw it in the chat room. Which state in 2010 had the highest percent of calf losses due to weather based off the number of calves that they have? And the answer is 66.5% of the losses of their calves were due to weather that year. But in doing my research, I found this very, very funny. Does anybody, do we have any guesses in there? Not yet. Everyone's trying to find their keyboard. Montana, I would think Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas.
We've got a Vermont.
We've got a Vermont's a good out of the Florida's a good out of the box. Nebraska. Oh, right. Pam wins. It was Hawaii. If they get too much precipitation on those animals and they can't get them dried off, yeah, I was stunned. I had to go and I actually called somebody at Montana Ag Statistics Services and talked to them about that. So anyways, every state is impacted by this. We don't, we tend to have the highest amount of cattle in the high plains, but every state has some form of cattle and livestock, and weather is going to impact them in some way or another. So the other thing I think we could do better, and it's just a lack of IT staffing, and is creating that archive so that the USDA offices are able to go back and take a look. And I think you can almost develop a climatology from just that, going back in time and comparing. So I think, go ahead. Is there one more slide? There we go. That last slide, that picture is hanging in the Glasgow office. It was a Charlie Russell print called Waiting for a Chinook. We're all always waiting for a Chinook unless you live in Browning. And then the winds and the Chinooks are the same. All right. Well, I know you guys are towards the end, and Wendy mentioned questions at the very, very end. So I will leave it at that. But I have a one-pager that I can send Wendy that she can send out with all of this too, if anybody's interested in using that for any further outreach.
All right. Thanks, Tanya, on that very interesting program, and thanks for detailing it for us. So I will now turn her back over to Wendy Kelly to get into Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And thanks, as always, to all of the presenters and the attendees. And here in a moment, Tony will advance the slide again as a reminder that we do have the contact information for each of the presenters in case you have follow-up questions and want to reach out to them. Also, we will post the recording of today's webinar along with the .pdf on the Wyoming Drought Information and Resources website, and we can also include the one-page handout on the canal tool there. I did drop in the chat and will make available on the Wyoming Drought Information and Resources website the canal link for the Wyoming, which is housed in the National Weather Service Cheyenne office. So you can check that link out. A great tool and very timely for this time of year when we have lambs and calving starting. Before we transition into questions and while we're still recording, I did want to just make one announcement, and I wanted to share this while we're recording in case you're watching this after, not live. So I will be transitioning from the role of hosting and organizing the Wyoming Conditions Monitoring Team efforts, which includes this webinar. So this is my last webinar, and I'll be turning it over, my role of sending out the emails and everything to all of you, to other colleagues at the University of Wyoming. Many of you may already be familiar with Dr. Christy Hansen. She's an ag economist and a state specialist for extension. So she'll be helping along with Micah Most, who is a University of Wyoming Extension ag and natural resources educator based in Johnson County. And he's a part of several statewide efforts, including the Sheep Task Force. So those are two folks that you may receive the emails from to register for the future webinars. So just keep an eye out for the links and be aware that there'll be a change in that. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll take questions, which we do have a couple in the chat.